Thank you so much for joining us in the studio for an incredibly important conversation about the overdose epidemic in Oswego with fentanyl. I am joined by Dave Polina, who is a recovery peer advocate with Farnam Family Services. We'll dig into exactly what that title and that role is, but first of all, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, I appreciate having me.
Let's start so the audience understands exactly what your role is. What is a recovery peer advocate?
So we are people with lived experience in substance use disorders or mental health histories to provide, kind of guidance and mentorship for people wherever they're at in their treatment journey, I'd say, or the stages of change. We meet people where they're at, even if they're using, to people who have been in long-term sobriety and are outside of treatment as well. So we're here to, make sure that they understand their rights. If they need us to be in a treatment meeting with them, or if they're being talked about in their treatment meeting for a review or something, if they want us in there, we can be there as a support and speak for them. Meet them in the community, doctor's appointments, court appointments, which a lot of people get nervous and scared, and they just like to have that extra support with them to feel a little bit more comfortable.
Talk to me a little bit about what services are available at Farnam and how you became a peer advocate, because I think that's crucial.
Yeah, so Farnam provides outpatient services, opioid treatment program. We have that in Oswego and Mexico. We're about to open one also in Auburn.
Oh, wow.
So we're expanding rapidly to provide these services through a vast county. We provide regular groups and one-on-ones, vocational services to help people get back into job services, art therapy. We try to do other therapy as well, like yoga, trying to really open it up to the clients to pick and choose which they feel might work best for them, and kind of make sure that there's available options for them. If something works better for the other, we could always switch them out and do that. So really a vast amount.
So you really do meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So our audience understands where you're at with this. You'll be sober 7 years in August. Congratulations to you. That's massive. What was your drug of choice?
It started with opioid painkillers and quickly led up to heroin. And that was pretty much when it started getting really bad for me. The opioid pills were a lot difficult to come by because makers of OxyContin wanted to change the formulation so they could not be abused. They did that thinking that it was going to help, but it fueled the beginning of the crisis, and that's a lot of stories I hear, that is when people began to go to heroin because it's a cheaper option, much more readily available. You could obviously inject it, snort it, abuse it.
You went to heroin.
Yeah. And it blew up quickly from there. A lot of people, that's just when it started rising rate really, really high.
So when you started using heroin, we had a conversation before you sat down. There was more of the pure heroin in your dosage, but then after a period of time, you began to recognize when you could tell when there was fentanyl in your dose.
At least a difference in it. So usually when I would get heroin or, kind of real heroin, it's a tannish-like substance. It's not all like chalky and white. So we would be able to get that, and the taste is different and all that stuff. And this is probably around 2015-ish when it started kind of changing around, we'd be getting stuff that was mainly white. And interestingly too, so I was already using to the point, but there's times where I'd get these bags, and when I would do them, I would get that feeling. I would get, when I first started doing opioids, the side effects of nausea and just really hitting me in general. And that is when and that was just one bag too, and usually that wouldn't do it. So when I would have that, I would start, becoming really nauseous and whoa, okay, this doesn't feel right. it feels totally different. And it just kept, continuing from there. That's what you'd get. That's what you'd get. And a lot of people, just obviously took it because what else are they going to take? And it's not like you really know what's in the heroin anyway, which is a scary thing.
So the high wasn't the same.
No, it was a lot more intense for what I was doing, my tolerance level at that point. When I did just one, it hit me a lot harder than it would have in general. And that's pretty much when I knew something. It was different. But I didn't really care at the time because I just wanted to get high. I wanted to be as high as I could, for as cheap as possible, and that was the option.
What was the turning point for you when you recognized that the fentanyl was detrimental and it was taking lives?
So probably around like 2014 or 15, that's when like the deaths started to get really increased. Access to treatment and medication-assisted treatment services were not as open as they are now. Really, Crouse was like the only one that did methadone, and there was maybe like 15 doctors in the area that provided Suboxone at the time, another opioid medication-assisted treatment. So around that time, really started getting bad, and I kept hearing a lot more overdoses, and yeah, it was terrifying. It really was.
So now, when users are on the street and they're getting opioids or heroin, is their dose largely synthetic?
Yes. Probably, I can't really say a percentage, but I believe that what I share with clients too, whatever you are taking, always assume that there's fentanyl in it, because people put fentanyl in everything. They're putting in cocaine, they're putting it, and you see a lot of cocaine overdoses now with fentanyl. The Molly, it's just sad. You really can't get real drugs anymore, I guess, that would be less dangerous than the current substances, especially now that they're adding a horse tranquilizer to it.
I was going to bring that up.
Xylazine,
Yep.
which is becoming extremely ridiculous. Cheap, you can buy a kilogram for around like $4, and $4 and you get a kilogram of that. You can mix it in and do all this, and it's causing a vast number of overdoses where it's very difficult to bring them out of it, because xylazine is not an opioid, so the Narcan does not hit it. It takes the opioids out, but you're still being, your respiratory system is still depressed because of the effects of xylazine. So now it's even more terrifying, and when the people are injecting it, it can lead to necrosis. It can lead to, seeing their muscle abscesses, see to the bone, like Crocodile, drug way back in 2010 or 11, 12 when it came out. Well, it came out before that, but when it was around prevalent. You really can't assume anything is real drugs anymore.
Interestingly, we're calling this overdose epidemic, or addressing the overdose epidemic. You can't even categorize something as an opioid epidemic anymore because it's these synthetic drugs.
Yeah, there's all these different analogs and other drugs that are put in to mimic the effects, to boost the high, to last longer. It is mainly synthetic, and there's really not much you can do anymore. You really can't. It's a very difficult thing for it to stop. I mean, if we had some of the things that we were doing now 5-10 years ago, maybe, but it's to a point now where harm reduction is almost the only answer for it, unless the government steps in and wants to decide to decriminalize and create products itself. That's my opinion, at least. You're not going to get a safe supply of drugs.
During our first meeting, you told me that when you hear about the death of a young person, you automatically assume it's an overdose. Are overdose deaths that prevalent And what is the drug that causes these overdose deaths?
So overdoses, obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die, right? But when I do see, it tends to be true. It does. You know, a lot of these kids are doing these drugs thinking they're real, like especially the counterfeit pills, right? They look exactly like the substances on the street, the pills that the pharmaceutical companies make. So these kids are grabbing these drugs thinking that they're getting a Xanax bar or another painkiller. But I mean, you also see it in kind of the celebrity life too, where, you know, Philip Seymour Hoffman overdosed and died on painkillers. Prince overdosed and died on painkillers. A lot of these, Mac Miller overdosed and died on painkillers, pills that were laced with fentanyl. So it's just, I don't know if it's because I hear it so much and that's just what my assumption is. But really, kids are going through a tough time now. They really are, especially with COVID and being at home when they all had to do that, at school and all that stuff. So the majority of it, I would say, is illicit opioids, fentanyl. It could be a whole variety of different substances too. You really don't know unless you test it, and that's really hard to do for the average person.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing your story and helping us educate the public. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.